Welcome to today's Cooperative American Physicians Incorporated presentation titled Protect Your Online Reputation. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's featured presenter, Dr. Kevin Poe. Dr. Kevin Poe is a board-certified internal medicine physician and founder of KevinMD.com, which Forbes called a must-read health blog. He is also co-author of the book Establishing, Managing, and Protecting Your Online Reputation, a social media guide for physicians and medical practices. Transforming his social media presence into a mainstream media voice, his commentary regularly appears in USA Today, where he is a member of the editorial board of contributors, as well as CNN and the New York Times. Dr. Poe received his medical degree at Boston University School of Medicine and practices primary care in Nashua, New Hampshire. He is a member of the 2010 class of New Hampshire's 40 Under 40 and a 2013 inductee to the Healthcare Internet Hall of Fame. Dr. Poe, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Kurt, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Kevin Poe, and I'm an internal medicine physician, founder and editor of KevinMD.com, social media's leading physician voice. A lot of people ask me how I got my start with social media, and I'd like to share the story that happened back in 2004, more than 10 years ago. I was having a conversation with my brother-in-law, and he said, "Kevin, you have a lot to say about medicine and healthcare. You really should start a blog." And I thought to myself, I had no idea what a blog was. So he showed me the website Blogger, and to me, it was a revelation because here was a site where you can write an article, share your thoughts, and then hit publish, and the world can read what you had to say. So I started my own blog at KevinMD.com, but honestly, I wasn't sure where this was going to go or how long this was going to last. Today, KevinMD is now an indispensable part of my professional identity, and I've discovered how social media can educate patients, define an online reputation, and make my voice heard by connecting with mainstream media. In today's webinar, I want to answer 3 questions for you. First, why is an online presence important? Second, how do I establish an online reputation? And finally, how can I protect an online reputation? So let's go ahead and answer that first question. Why is an online presence important? I once had an email conversation with Catherine Chrétien. She's an internal medicine physician in Washington, D.C., and one of the country's leading academic healthcare social media researchers. And she said that in medical school and residency, doctors don't have a lot of courses on online professionalism and managing an online reputation. Doctors don't have a lot of social media role models. And that corroborates my own findings because whenever I give talks on how social media can define an online reputation, it's often the first time that physicians are hearing about Facebook, blogs, and Twitter in the healthcare setting. And Dr. Chrétien goes on, and she says, just as we help develop the professional identities of physicians, we need to help develop their online professional identities, because that's what's going to help them the most in today's digital and increasingly transparent health world. And she's absolutely right. Patients today, they're not just going online to research their diagnosis and treatment options. They're going online to research their doctors as well. Almost half of patients look online for information about their doctors. So here's my first critical point. Healthcare professionals need to Google themselves at least once a week because that's what patients are doing. Fortunately, there are tools that can automate this process. I like a tool called Google Alerts. Just go to google.com/alerts. And in the search query box, you could enter your name or the name of your practice, and whenever it's mentioned online, you can get notified immediately via email. So let's go ahead and Google my name. You'll see that I have a pretty big online presence. My blog shows up near the top of results, but so are my other social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Wikipedia. Other doctors I talk to, they're a little bit apprehensive about being visible online. And what shows up when their names are Googled? In many cases, it's likely pages from online physician rating sites. And these sites give doctors a tremendous amount of anxiety. You get a group of doctors together and just say the words online doctor ratings, and it will evoke a visceral reaction, right? I remember going to a conference last year to talk about online reputation, and I walked into the convention hall, and the organizers rushed up to me breathlessly. They said, "You're going to tell us how to get rid of these sites, right?" And I thought to myself, no, I'm not. If you look at every other industry, books, movies, hotels, restaurants, people want to know what others are thinking. Before I buy anything, I go to Amazon and I read the reviews first. The same thing is going to happen in healthcare. Online physician ratings, they're not going away. More doctors are going to be standing at bedside saying, you know what, I've been doing this for 20 years. And patients are going to say, yeah, I can see that. Yelp says mediocre at best. I now want to share two stories which crystallize how important an online reputation is for doctors. The first doctor I want to talk about is a surgeon in Texas. His name is Philip Leggett. One day, he had a disgruntled patient who happened to be a web designer. And this patient created an exact replica of Dr. Leggett's website, except he filled it with false patient reviews that were extremely negative. Here's an example. After Dr. Leggett performed surgery, he threw me out in the alley like a baby in a dumpster. The thing is, Dr. Leggett wasn't even aware that this doppelganger site existed. It wasn't until one of his other patients came up to him and said, hey, doc, you got to take a look at your website. There's something wrong with it. So Dr. Leggett investigated and involved the authorities. Eventually, this disgruntled patient was arrested. And the authorities asked the patient, why did you try to impersonate Dr. Leggett and slander his name on the web? And the patient admitted he was angry at Dr. Leggett because he didn't prescribe him the right type of medications. The second doctor I want to talk about, her name is Vineet Arora. She's an internist in Chicago. She once Googled her name, and she was directed to another Vineet Arora, who happened to be an ophthalmologist in Ontario, Canada. And that wouldn't be so bad, except a lot of the headlines associated with his name was this: ophthalmologist accused of blinding patients. Now, would people think that she was that guy? Her name and professional identity was associated with this other doctor. Her own University of Chicago faculty profile wasn't coming up high in the search. So at that moment, she decided to generate her own online content. So now, when people Google her name, she's in complete control of the content. And as she puts it, in this day and age, because your online reputation is often your first impression, it better be a good one. And these two examples vividly illustrate how important an online presence is for doctors. And this is going to lead us into the second question that I want to answer today. And this question is going to comprise the bulk of today's webinar. How do I establish an online reputation? Now, I think there are two ways to establish an online reputation. The first way is with physician rating sites. And I know these sites get a lot of attention from doctors, but how often are they actually used by patients? So let's do a little thought experiment. Let's take 100 random patients and ask them, how many of you are aware that physician rating sites exist? The answer, about 65%. 65% of patients are aware that physician rating sites exist. If you ask them, how many read a review of their doctor online, about 20% would say yes. And finally, if you ask them how many wrote a review of their doctor online, only 5% would say yes. But even if 5% of patients wrote a review of their doctor, we can't ignore these sites. Because what these sites will do is scour the web, looking for publicly available information about you. And whether you want one or not, these sites will create a profile page that contains your name, your contact information, board certification status, and hospital affiliation. And, of course, they allow patients to rate you online. These rating sites are backed by companies who are experts in search engine optimization, or SEO, and that's a science of ranking high on Google. So unless you already have a prominent online presence, these rating site profiles rank high on Google and be patients' first impression of you online. So it's important to check your identity and correct any inaccurate information. After one of my talks last year, a doctor took my advice and she Googled herself. And she looked closer at her profile from one of these rating sites, and it said that she was deceased. And trust me, being dead is definitely not good for patients. Another doctor, psychiatrist, he was at home playing with his kids. He heard a knock at the door, and on his porch, he found two mentally unstable patients. And he asked them, "How did you find me?" And they held out a printout of his rating site profile, which had not only his home address, but his cell phone number as well. Up to 43% of business location information online is incorrect. And that could be a problem with services like Google. I once talked to a hospital social media manager who fields complaints from his doctors asking him to correct their listings on Google. Google uses publicly available information to create their listings, and in some cases, that can include information on physician rating sites. So if the information is inaccurate there, it may show up inaccurate on Google. It's not something you can ignore. People use Google all the time on their cell phones, looking for directions, and you don't want patients going to the wrong office for their doctor's appointments. But Google is not known for their customer service. They don't have a 1-800 number that you can call. It's actually a cumbersome process to correct information on Google. So it's best that they have the right information in the first place, and ensuring that information is accurate on physician rating sites is one way to do so. Now, we can also leverage the visibility of rating sites to help establish online reputation. And if you read the satirical news site The Onion, they came up with this idea here. Physician shoots off a few Adderall prescriptions to improve Yelp rating. Obviously, I'm not going to recommend this. But the idea of being more proactive about the content on rating sites has some merit. So instead, why don't we ask more patients to rate us online? Don't just cherry pick or ask for the good ones. Ask all your patients to do so. There are dozens of studies showing that the majority of online ratings are in fact positive and better than a lot of doctors would think. Asking more patients to rate you online will accomplish two things. They'll make rating sites more useful for patients by populating them with more reviews. Also, they will dilute negative ratings and make them look more like outliers. One day, I recently brought my car in for service, and after I paid the bill, they gave me this card with specific instructions on how to rate that car dealership on Google. Medical practices are starting to recognize the value of online ratings, and they're starting to tell their patients to do the same thing by handing out similar cards. Now, I wouldn't rely on online ratings solely for an online presence. Remember, they're backed by for-profit companies who don't necessarily have physicians' best interests at heart. It's likely your rating site's profile will be littered with ads, making it look like you're endorsing the products. Also, to change information, you have to agree to one-sided terms of service agreements. Here's an example of one here. You acknowledge that your physician-provided material may be used without restriction for any purpose whatsoever, commercial or otherwise, without any compensation or obligation to you. Now, not everyone has taken an adversarial stance when it comes to online ratings. Some hospitals have even embraced them. And I want to share a case study of one such institution. This is the University of Utah healthcare system. And what they did is create a 5-star rating system from scratch based on over 40,000 Press Ganey survey results. So I took a random profile from a physician at the University of Utah, and you can see that that rating is in the upper right-hand corner. The average physician rating there is 4.7 stars out of 5, which is consistent with studies showing that most online physician reviews are in fact positive. If you scroll down her profile, you'll see the various Press Ganey categories: likelihood of recommending a doctor, my confidence in a doctor, time doctor spent with me. And further down, you have narrative patient comments. Fueled by these ratings, profile pages from the University of Utah, they rank high on Google. In this case, even above a site like HealthGrades. So what the University of Utah did is seize control of online ratings away from for-profit companies. Their profile pages are more useful for patients, and they use better validated data. And I know some of you may have some strong feelings when it comes to Press Ganey, but I still would rather rely on their data over an anonymous review from someone who may or may not be your patient. These type of physician-driven ratings, I think, are the future, and a model that hospitals nationwide should follow. So that summarizes one way to establish online reputation, is to use online physician rating sites. But I think there's a second way, a more powerful way to establish online reputation, and that's by creating content about yourself online. Let's take a look at a sample Google results page. And there are studies showing where readers click on this page. You'll find that about a third of readers will click on the very first result. Another third will click on the second or third result. Fewer than 10% of readers would even go on to the second page of results. So it's important to control those top listings on Google. How can we do that? Well, one way is to have a spread in a major media publication. And if you can make that happen, go for it. In fact, I encourage physicians to connect with mainstream media because a newspaper story or a television appearance will eventually find its way online, and it's a powerful way to control the message associated with your name. An interview with the New York Times can be that piece of high-ranking content that can push physician rating sites or negative news stories onto the second page of results. But let's face it, not everyone here is like Dr. Oz, or will have the opportunity to speak to the New York Times. So we need another way. Well, we can have a website. And I think creating a website is a great idea. Everyone should have a website. But when it comes to those top listings on Google, you are competing with rating site companies whose entire business model is based on ranking high on Google. It's unlikely that most physicians are going to have the time or expertise to compete with these sites. So what we need are tools that are powerful in the eyes of Google and allow us to create content about ourselves online. And today, everyone listening here, you're all in luck because those tools are available to us, and they're free. They are social media platforms, blogs, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. Social media platforms get ranked high on Google searches and allow us to create powerful content about ourselves online. And whenever I bring up social media to my fellow physicians or even hospital administrators or executives, they look at me a little bit skeptically. They say, I don't have time for social media, or I don't see how social media is going to make a difference. So let me take you on a brief social media journey and share stories and case studies of physician social media experts who are making a name for themselves online. I'll also share a few tips I've learned along the way to help you maximize your social media presence. Remember, the more social media platforms that you engage in, the bigger your online presence will be. Defining yourself online with social media is the most powerful way to establish an online reputation. The first doctor I want to talk about, his name is Howard Lux. He's an orthopedic surgeon in New York City, and he runs a popular blog. His patients drive his content management strategy because the questions they're asking in the clinic are the same ones people are asking on Google, and he writes those questions down. When his day is done and he's sitting in the office, Dr. Lux takes out that list of questions, and he spends a few minutes and dictates answers to those questions so they can be transcribed on his blog. And those 5 minutes of effort will pay off for years to come. When people ask those questions on Google, chances are the answers from his blog will show up on the first page. And that can only cement his authority on the web and expand his presence online. So blogs are the first social media platform I want to talk about today. They are simply websites where you publish content for the web to see with a click of a button. It could be a patient education article, a physician perspective on breaking health news, or an inspirational human interest story. There are many blog platforms, and the major ones are WordPress, Medium, Blogger, and Tumblr, which are all free and function in similar ways. I think blogs offer a key advantage over some other types of social media. You have more control over your content. On Twitter and Facebook, your content is subject to constantly changing terms and conditions. If Facebook wants to inject more advertisements into the newsfeed, for instance, there's little you can do about it. On a blog, you have more control over how you shape your content. So I think it makes sense to have a blog be a social media hub, as I do with kevinmd.com, and then have complementary platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. They could be your social media outposts that spoke out from your hub, where you can spark conversations and attract patients who consume information and engage on those different social media sites. So let me share a few blogging tips. Imagine that you're talking to a friend. The best blogs tend to be informal and approachable. The best way to accomplish such a tone is to be conversational. Think about the audience. Are you talking to patients? Then be sure to write in a casual manner and explain medical jargon or avoid it altogether. Is your audience primarily doctors? Then you could include more terminology that only medical professionals may know or tackle physician-specific topics. Don't worry if the posts aren't perfect. Make sure the spelling and grammar are correct, but don't worry if the final product won't win a Pulitzer Prize. When it comes to blog writing, quantity does matter, so don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Post according to a schedule. It could range from several times a week to every day. Editors at the Huffington Post recommend posting at least 2 to 3 times a week for 30 days. And that may seem daunting, but the more regular blogs are posted, the more readers will come back knowing there will be more. Pay attention to the title. This is the most important part of blog posts. There's a gentleman named Darren Rouse. He founded the popular how-to blogging site ProBlogger. He said that titles change the destiny of your posts, and he's absolutely right. People often decide whether or not to read your article based solely on its title. Blog titles also appear throughout the web, on social media sites, links from other bloggers, and most important, on search engines. When a blog is indexed on Google, it's the title that most people read. The next doctor I want to talk about, his name is Zubin Damania. He's an internal medicine physician in Las Vegas. And some of you may recognize him and know him better as Z-Dog MD. And what Zubin does is create edgy rap videos that have garnered millions of views on YouTube. And he would rap about topics like safe sex, alternative medicine, and vaccines. One of his most popular videos is a Michael Jackson parody called Manhood in the Mirror, where he would rap about testicular self-exams of all things. And ever since that video was posted, he has received calls from student health clinics across the country saying they're diagnosing more testicular masses than ever. In one of his talks, he said that he had more public health influence dressed in a bathrobe creating videos on YouTube in his bedroom than he ever did while working in the hospital. So I want to talk about YouTube next. It's the Internet's leading video streaming service, and it's actually the #2 search engine on the web. Videos help patients make a personal connection to a practice in a way that written text cannot. So for physicians who aren't comfortable writing, videos capture what they do every day in the exam room. And let me share a few YouTube tips. First, don't worry about the equipment. Video equipment should not be a major obstacle. Inexpensive video cameras can now produce high-definition video. You can even buy a tripod for smartphones to record in high definition. And these are the options you want to try first. Video editing is easier than ever using iMovie on the iPad or Mac or Windows Live Movie Maker on PCs. The advantage to making your own videos is that you can delete and start over as many times as you want. Videos can be posted at any time of the day or night to provide context to breaking medical news stories or post timely practice updates. If you do not want to be seen, videos can still be used. There's free software like Screencast-O-Matic. Just Google Screencast-O-Matic, and that can record screencasts of PowerPoint presentations. That means video content can still be created even if you don't want to personally appear on screen. Be mindful of the length. The attention span of a YouTube viewer is relatively short. Patient education videos should be shorter than 3 minutes. Talk slowly and speak clearly. People often talk faster on camera. If a video is to be scripted, 1 minute of video should have about 140 words. End videos with a call to action. Here's a tip from Neil Baum. He's a urologist in New Orleans. And he ends all of the videos with a call to action. For instance, he could be talking about a topic like urinary incontinence, and he'll end the video by saying, I know you may have some additional questions about incontinence, and I suggest you go to my website, or you are welcome to call my office to make an appointment. Finally, complement the videos across platforms. Some people learn best by watching a video, others don't. Be sure to include this information as text somewhere on your website, blog, or your practice's Facebook page. Speaking of Facebook, if you Google MacArthur OBGYN, which is a practice in Texas, you'll find that their Facebook page ranks pretty high. I was once talking to one of their gynecologists. His name is Jeff Livingston. And he said, having a Facebook page allowed his group to connect with a demographic who ordinarily would be a little bit apprehensive about going to the gynecologist, teenagers. And he was talking to one of his teenage patients once, and she told him how cool it was that her doctor's practice was on Facebook, and that was the only reason why she read educational materials on STDs and teenage pregnancy. With over 1 billion users, Facebook is a powerful platform to drive traffic to your website, share articles, and spread your health message. So here are some Facebook tips. You want to separate your personal and professional identity. About 30% of physicians receive friend requests on Facebook. 40% of those doctors accept them. And that can lead to some dangerous situations. A typical personal Facebook profile contains pictures of your kids or what you did on vacation. It's not necessarily information that you want patients to see. It blurs that line between your personal and professional presence. And it could lead to situations like this. You have a patient in the exam room talking to a medical assistant. The caption below reads, I'm sure Dr. Klumer wishes she could be here so she could talk about your chemo. The patient who's friends with Dr. Klumer sees an update, first day off in 2 weeks, going to get hammered. Awkward, right? So probably not a good idea to friend patients. Instead, practice what I call dual citizenship and separate your personal and professional identities. And I know there's been some controversy about that approach, but I still think it's relevant specific to Facebook. You can still have a personal Facebook profile, but close it to the public and only open it to friends and family. Then create a separate business Facebook page for your practice, and it's a valuable platform to share reliable health information with patients. Next, you want to keep a vigilant eye on privacy. Facebook constantly updates their privacy policy, so I would check these settings once a week to ensure what you want private remains that way. Use big, compelling images. Your content has more competition than ever to appear in your readers' news feeds, and you can't handicap yourself with a small image or, worse, no image at all. Posts with images receive 37% more interaction than those without photos. You want to use images that are at least 600 by 315 pixels, so it shows up as a large image in your readers' news feeds. Anything smaller will have significantly less impact. Here's an example of a Facebook post with a small image, and compare that with a post using a larger image. It makes a huge difference. Social media has also gone real-time. We have platforms like Twitter, and I describe Twitter as a service that allows you to send short text messages to people who are interested in hearing what you have to say. Twitter can connect physicians with their colleagues so they can learn from them. Did you know, for instance, there are over 20 million citations on Medline, and the volume of medical literature grows by 10% every year. Just a few years ago, there were 24,000 cancer articles published, and that averages to about 64 new manuscripts every single day. Who can possibly keep up with all that knowledge? One way is to use social media to filter out all that information. You can follow thought leaders on Twitter, listen to what they have to say, and more important, read the articles they share. I have a list of 40 healthcare personalities that I follow on Twitter. They're doctors, policy experts, and social media leaders. And you can find it right here, twitter.com/KevinMD/lists/essential. And I check this list several times a day. Following these thought leaders and reading the articles they share is one of the most powerful ways I can think of to stay up to date in any area of healthcare, and is a reason that resonates with physicians. Once you're comfortable listening, you can take the next step and contribute content by sharing your own links to stories and articles with reputable health information. And don't only share them with clinicians, but also with the public at large. The last few social media platforms I want to talk about fall under the category of professional social networks. They are LinkedIn and Doximity. These sites are for people in professional occupations. LinkedIn is open to the public, while Doximity is only open to physicians. And both of these sites are making the traditional CV obsolete. When people now ask for my CV, I simply direct them to either my LinkedIn or Doximity page. A profile on one of these sites is simply a digital translation of your CV. You can include your bio, where you worked, where you studied, and list your accomplishments and publications. Here's an example of my profile on LinkedIn, and it appears in a similar format on Doximity. And you can see similarities to a traditional CV. So let me share some tips when creating your own profile. You want to focus on the summary. The summary is a key piece of your profile and is often what's seen first. It puts a personal stamp on your presence in a way that isn't possible with the rest of the profile, which is in a more traditional resume format. This is where an interesting story can be told or highlight a unique element of your practice. Spend some time to make the summary a powerful statement to colleagues and prospective patients. You can see how visible the summary is on LinkedIn. It shows right on top. And here it is on Doximity. My next tip, you got to make it look good. Use a professional headshot. Be thoughtful with how you describe yourself, and update your profile when you change jobs or receive an award. You want to put your best face forward for patients who find your profile on Google. Don't worry about the bells and whistles. LinkedIn and Doximity can do so much more than simply digitize your CV. As social networks, they can also help you build connections with your colleagues or with those with similar interests or history. You will receive invitation from others who may want to connect with you. But remember, all of these features are superfluous to your online presence. It's always your choice to accept an invitation, make a connection, or invite people. You can be as active or as passive on these networks as you want to be. The important part is creating the profile itself, which is visible on a Google search. Now, which one should you choose? LinkedIn tends to be more visible on Google, while Doximity simulcasts their profile on U.S. News and World Report. That means if you have a profile on Doximity, you'll also have one on the U.S. News website. It's like getting two digital footprints for the price of one. With LinkedIn, you have to enter your data into your profile. Doximity has staff members who will enter your CV for you into their system. Simply upload your CV and your Doximity profile will magically be visible on Google within a few days. And for a lot of doctors, that's a huge time saver. Because of LinkedIn and Doximity's professional context and relatively low barrier of entry, I think they're ideal platforms for providers who are hesitant to dip their toes into the online waters. LinkedIn and Doximity are easy and powerful ways to start your digital footprint. Although not a social media site, I want to talk about Google My Business. Google My Business is a powerful tool by Google that allows you to feed in your practice information into that search engine. Google has been evolving into a more holistic search engine where results are no longer simply just a list of links. If you Google my primary care listing, you'll see that my Google listing has prominent right column visibility. And this also applies to Google Maps. There's a bit more friction to obtain a Google listing. Once you sign up at Google My Business, just type in Google My Business in a search engine. Google will physically mail you a postcard to verify your address. After following the directions on that postcard, your listing should then show up shortly after. Now, we are confronted with a vast array of social media options, and a lot of doctors ask me, Kevin, where on earth do I start? So let me share my approach with you. My first step is to claim your profile on physician rating sites and correct any inaccurate information there. If I were to choose just one physician rating site, it would be HealthGrades. Other good options are Vitals, RateMDs, and Yelp. My next step, create a profile on a professional social network, LinkedIn or Doximity, or even better, do both. Then go to Google My Business and feed in your practice information to Google. After doing those two things, stop. Ask yourself, what are my goals for social media? Is it educating patients, connecting and learning from colleagues, advocating for a cause, or debating healthcare reform? Then, as you become more comfortable being visible online, you could incrementally adopt more social media platforms to fit those goals, keeping in mind that the more platforms that you engage in, the bigger your online presence will be. So for some physicians, their next step could be going on Twitter and listening to what others have to say. Then, once they get comfortable with that, they can share articles with reliable health information or interesting health stories on Facebook or Twitter. And finally, they can progress to the ultimate step of creating their own content. It could be videos on YouTube or writing articles on blogs. And if nothing about social media resonates with you or you simply don't have the time, you can stop after spending a few hours on LinkedIn or Doximity and Google My Business. Just those acts alone are tremendously powerful and will put you ahead of the majority of your peers. LinkedIn profiles get ranked high on Google result pages, and a Google listing will give you prominent right column visibility. The goal is to dominate the search engine rankings for your name, so you're in better control of those top listings on Google. And if your online presence is big enough, you can use it to help find new patients. Over the past few years, I've been asking new patients how they found me. About 15% say it's because of what I do online. Howard Lux, the orthopedic surgeon, he estimates that 15 to 18% of patients find him on the web. The polling firm, YouGov, found that 80% of patients said that hospitals with a strong social media presence were perceived as being cutting edge, and 60% of patients said that social media was a factor in them choosing that hospital. And I get asked all the time, Kevin, what's the ROI, the return on investment of social media? For me, finding and connecting with new patients is by far the most powerful and direct one. Now that you've spent all that time to establish online reputation, you have to protect it. How can I protect an online reputation? This is our final question we're going to answer today. Imagine opening up a newspaper and finding a headline like this: Doctor fired over Facebook posts. This was a real story of an emergency physician in Rhode Island who decided it was a good idea to post interesting cases on Facebook about patients she saw in the emergency room. Someone who read her Facebook page recognized some of the patients she talked about and some of the diagnoses she made, and subsequently she was sanctioned by the Rhode Island Board of Medicine and had her hospital privileges revoked. And you hear about stories like these all the time about doctors and nurses getting fired because they're posting inappropriate content online, and that doesn't help anybody's online reputation. Protecting an online reputation means protecting patient privacy. And how can we protect patient privacy online? Of course, HIPAA, the federal privacy law, needs to be the minimum standard, and we need to aim above that on the web. And that may sound like common sense, but consider that 90% of state medical boards have received complaints from the public about doctors being unprofessional online. So we need to be as professional on the web as we are in the room face-to-face with patients. Also, whatever we post online needs to be written in ink. A blog post, once it gets indexed by a search engine like Google, can always be looked up in the archives even after that post is deleted. Sometimes posts can be technically HIPAA compliant, but still be considered unprofessional. Here you have a doctor on a yacht. The caption reads, "Patients sometimes failed to appreciate Dr. Bickelstein's tweets." Twitter update, "Sailing on the Adriatic. Would love to thank all the lifelong smokers who made this trip possible." So rather than going through dozens of pages of social media guidelines, I have what's called an elevator test. Whatever you post online needs to be appropriate if you say it aloud in a crowded hospital elevator. Today, patients have more avenues than ever to express their displeasure online, whether it's through a rating site, blog, or other social media platform. And it's inevitable that everyone in healthcare will face criticism on the web. And a lot of doctors, they're just not sure how to respond. Some may resort to nefarious methods, like this situation here. Dr. Bob wants you to think long and hard about your one-star reviews. Others take a more confrontational approach. One day I was reading an article that told the story of an optometrist in New York, a Dr. Justin Bazan, and he responds aggressively to every negative review he gets. Dr. Bazan takes an active approach to dealing with patient reviews online. So I went to his Yelp page, and he actually has 167 reviews, most of them actually positive. But let's see how he responds to some of the more negative ones. Here's a one-star review from a David S. "Hokey policies and manipulative pricing. Bully tactics, basically leaving me no choice but to pay out of pocket." And how did Dr. Bazan respond? "You might be the worst Yelper on Yelp. Stop using Yelp to itch and moan." I think he meant to say bitch and moan. Wow, seriously, man. I'll say this for Dr. Bazan. He has no filter. And that may work for him. But remember, other patients see these responses and may not feel like he's the right doctor for them. Not to mention he shares details from individual patient visits, which violates patient privacy. While it may feel good to aggressively respond this way, it's not an approach I endorse. So here's what I recommend instead. My first step is to listen to the criticism and hear what patients have to say. When patients leave reviews online, it's the only way they have a voice. Whenever a patient leaves my exam room, I don't know what they thought about me, my medical assistant, whether there was enough parking, or if the magazines in the waiting room were up to date. And I've read hundreds of patient reviews, and yes, a lot of patients are frustrated with our healthcare system. They're frustrated they have to wait weeks to see a doctor, that they never hear back from the physician after going for a lab test or an x-ray. And one of the more recent issues I hear are that doctors are too busy looking at their computer screens rather than looking at patients when they're talking to them. So I've made changes in my practice based on what I've read online. I offer more same-day appointments. I make sure patients get a copy of their raw data back whenever they have a lab test or an x-ray. And I don't bring a computer in the room anymore because I want to look at patients in the eye when I'm talking to them. So by listening to this online feedback, not only does it help me change my practice, it's also helped me become a better doctor as well. Whenever you read criticism online, there's a strong temptation to respond to it immediately. You want to set the record straight. You want to clear the air, right? Hold off on that temptation because it's rare that any type of online argument is going to result in anything productive. Instead, here's my second tip. Take that conversation offline. Respond with a standard reply, perhaps thanking that patient for his comment and asking him to call the clinic to discuss his concerns. And if you can resolve the dispute over the phone or in person, patients may take down their negative review or even add an addendum saying, you know what, this office is listening to what I have to say. And that can turn a negative situation into a more constructive one. Third, read the fine print. I've been practicing medicine for over 10 years now, and during that time, I have only one review on RateMDs. One day, I had a confrontational encounter with an unhappy patient. And despite the best efforts of me and my staff, I was not able to amicably resolve that conflict. Shortly after this episode, numerous one-star ratings showed up on RateMDs, and trust me, the comments were even worse. It was certainly plausible that these comments may have come from that same person. So I reported the comments to RateMDs, citing their terms of service. You will not post multiple ratings for a single doctor. RateMD's investigated and found that the comments all came from the same IP address. And to my surprise, they then proceeded to remove the ratings. So it pays to read the fine print and report any reviews you think are suspicious. And finally, don't sue. There are very few lawsuits where doctors successfully sued rating sites to take down negative reviews. I once read an interview with a spokesperson at Yelp, and he said that Yelp would not honor any physician request to take down a negative rating because it's going to infringe on patients' rights to free speech. Also, don't sue patients. And let me share the story of a neurologist in Minnesota. His name is David McKee. One day, Dr. McKee had a consult. A patient, unfortunately, had a stroke and was in the intensive care unit. This patient's son, however, wasn't happy with Dr. McKee's bedside manner, and he let everyone he could know about it. The hospital, the State Medical Society, and the American Academy of Neurology. Dr. McKee wasn't happy about this, so he sued this man's son for defamation, and after years in the courts, the case was dismissed by Minnesota State Supreme Court. Now let's see how that affected Dr. McKee's online reputation. If you Google his name, as many patients do today, you'll see the story come up among the first few results, and that obviously isn't the best first online impression. And if you review some of his online ratings, some of them aren't even from his own patients, but from people who only know him because of his lawsuit. So not only was suing the patient ultimately expensive and unsuccessful, it made a bad online situation even worse. Let me share the story of another doctor who also sued a patient for a negative review, and this time it made front-page headlines in a newspaper. So now whenever you Google her name, it comes up as the first result. And these are examples of what's known as the Streisand effect. Back in the early 2000s, Barbara Streisand sued a group of photographers for taking a picture of her Malibu home. And an unintended consequence of that lawsuit is that it brought more attention to those pictures. So if you sue patients, you're just going to bring more attention to that criticism. Don't sue, avoid the courts, and beware of the Streisand effect. Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, "Do one thing every day that scares you." And for a lot of us in healthcare, being visible online can be a frightening proposition. But if we don't take the steps to proactively define ourselves online, someone else is going to do it for us, whether we like it or not. An online reputation is just as important, if not more, than a reputation in the community. And I want to get back to Dr. Catherine Chrétien, the academic physician social media leader I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. She says that healthcare professionals don't have any social media role models. Who can they be? Let's start right here with everybody listening to this webinar. And it's great that we have so many people here interested in how social media can define an online reputation. But now it's time to take the next step. Let's go from being social media enthusiasts to social media ambassadors and be the social media role models that every healthcare professional desperately needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Poe. And at this time, we are ready to take your questions. We have quite a few that came in along the way. We have about 10 minutes remaining in our time together, and we'll start with the first of those written questions. It came in from Anita's location. Should you hire someone to help you with increasing online presence, or can it be done by the MD themselves?
I think that's a great question. It's a question I get asked often. I know a lot of doctors are very busy, and they're asking me, I don't have the time to do everything you're saying. So I think at minimum, claiming a profile on Health Grades and creating a professional profile on Doximity and LinkedIn takes no more than a few hours at most. And for a lot of doctors, that may be enough because that presence tends to show up high in Google searches. I think a lot of doctors should be able to create a profile on LinkedIn or Doximity by themselves. But if they want to outsource it and use a reputation management company, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But what they're going to do is use a lot of the techniques that I described in today's webinar So I think that if you want to pay the money, that's fine, but I think it's certainly something that doctors can do themselves. If physicians work with marketing departments at a hospital, for instance, they're more than happy to help you out and show you the ropes and do the right thing and give you some guidance. So whether you want to pay a reputation management company or do it yourself, I think are both equally fine options. Just be careful when you choose a reputation management company to check the references and make sure that they have a lot of experience working with physicians.
Our next question from Kimberly's location. Many physicians seem to focus on 2 to 3 very negative comments despite telling them to increase their presence to dilute these posts. Is there any other advice that I can give them on this matter?
That's true. I think doctors in general are very sensitive, and there's no doctor that's going to be perfect. Like I said during my webinar, there are dozens of studies showing that about 70 to 90% of online comments about doctors are positive. The problem is the people who write comments sometimes, they tend to be the most disgruntled ones. There are medical practices and hospitals who are making a concerted effort to get more patients to rate their doctors online. I think that we need to manage physicians' expectations. We cannot expect every doctor to have 100% perfect reviews, just like you go to a hotel, for instance. No, you go to TripAdvisor, not all of those reviews are perfect. And there are actually studies showing that if you have a few negative reviews thrown in, it actually makes the entire rating more trustworthy. So for doctors who are fixated on that 1 or 2 bad reviews, I would encourage them to ask more of their patients to rate them online, to dilute them, and if the doctor is competent, they're going to find that most of those ratings are in fact better than they would think.
Next, with about 6 minutes remaining, Carol's question. We have a group of 9 physicians in 5 locations. Should I do Google My Business for each physician or a single one for the group practice and primary location?
Yeah, that's a great question. My advice is to do it for each individual physician, because if you're a patient and you're looking for a doctor on Google, it's likely you're going to Google the doctor's name, and you're not necessarily going to Google that doctor's practice. So my recommendation for large organizations or for hospital systems with more than one doctor is to have a Google My Business presence for each individual physician.
All right, next up from Kim's location, how do you ask patients to post positive reviews without seeming needy?
Yep, another great question. I think that there's no good ways to do. There's no best practices. I think a lot of doctors and a lot of medical practices in the hospital are still trying to find the best way to doing so. Of course, you want to do it in a low-key manner. You don't want to necessarily coerce patients into giving them good reviews. In one of my slides I showed earlier, that was actually from an orthopedic practice in Tennessee, and that's an actual card I asked for permission to use in my presentation, and there's just simply handing out cards with instructions whether they would and give the patient the option to rate their doctor or not. That's the approach that I probably would recommend, just a low-key approach, just simply handing out cards or having a sign out at the front desk asking for the patient to rate doctors on Google. But I think it depends on your patients, depends on your practice location, and you have to experiment with the best ways of doing so.
Next question. I did an insurance review that resulted in a patient being denied for a procedure by her insurance. The patient wrote an angry review that was slanderous. How can an online review be changed? Yeah,
I think it depends on the site. I think in general it's very difficult to change an online review unless the patient blatantly disregards the terms of service agreement. My recommendation here would be to simply ask that patient to call the clinic and see if that could be resolved offline. I think the worst thing you could do is respond and get into a back and forth online. So if you have a generic message asking the patient to call the clinic and see whether you can resolve it, that probably would be the best approach. And if it's resolved amicably, perhaps the patient himself can remove the review. But let's take a step back. I think that in general it's best, rather than relying on and taking a reactive approach and relying on yourself to remove negative ratings, it's better to create that content about yourself in the first place. Because if you create content on one of the various social media sites or with a Doximity or LinkedIn profile, what that will do is give you control over those top listings on Google and can push these review sites and push negative ratings perhaps onto the second page. So your goal is to marginalize these negative reviews. So while it may be very difficult to remove them, what you can do is marginalize them by creating content that you control that ranks higher than negative reviews and push it down.
All right, and our next question, do you recommend buying Google ads or Yelp ads?
I think that's fine if you want to spend the money to do so. Google has AdWords and Yelp has AdWords as well. I try to use a free approach because if you go use AdWords or you buy ads on Google, it's a pretty much an ongoing thing. I think if you try to have a web presence organically, by not paying for words, I think it's more everlasting, and you're not tied to these monthly payments where you have to pay Google and Yelp forever just to have an online presence. So if you could build a presence organically without paying, I think that's probably a better approach in the long term.
From Randall's location, with about 2 minutes remaining, employees are often excellent brand ambassadors. Should we invest in formal training for all employees so they can each be responsible for a different piece of our practice's online reputation? Or should we do training emphasizing how important it is for employees to have professional personal profiles and post on social media?
Well, I think that's dependent on each facility. I can't speak for your facility or all the each one is going to have a different philosophy. I think for large organizations, at the very least, their employees, their workers, doctors and nurses and whatnot, they need training on how to be professional on social media. Every institution should have some type of social media policy where it makes it explicit that you shouldn't share patient content, where you shouldn't take pictures and put them up on Facebook. These are these basics that may seem like common sense, but you hear stories all the time in the media about doctors getting in trouble because they're doing just that. So at the very least, every healthcare worker should have some minimal training on how to behave themselves online. And whether you want to take the next step and help them each individually grab a piece of their online reputation, or if you want to manage that on a more systemic level, I think that's up to each individual organization, and there's going to be different answers for each of them.
And with about 1.25 minutes, can you have a profile on Doximity and LinkedIn for practice as opposed to individual doctors?
You could have a practice profile on LinkedIn, and you could have an individual one on LinkedIn. On Doximity, I believe you could have it only for individual doctors. I'm not 100% sure on that. I will have to check on that. If you can email me at kevinmd@gmail.com, I can get that answer for you. I'm pretty sure Doximity only has individual physicians, but I'll have to get back to you on whether you could have a practice page on Doximity.
And our last question, which reputation management website do you recommend to hire?
I don't have any recommendations in terms of ones that you pay for. Like I said, I'm a proponent of doing it yourself and using these tools, which are free and actually quite powerful. I can't endorse a specific one, and I don't have a specific one to recommend. But if you go through your hospital's marketing team, they should have some recommendations for you. Or if you go online, there's many of them as well that advertise themselves as working with medical facilities and doctors, so you'll have to go through them and check the references. But I don't have a specific one that I recommend offhand.
Thank you very much. It does bring us to the conclusion of today's presentation. We ask that the audience please stay connected as we are going to take you into the online evaluation, and we value your feedback. That concludes today's presentation, Protect Your Online Reputation, brought to you by the Cooperative of American Physicians Incorporated and presented by Dr. Kevin Poe. We do hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. As a reminder, we do ask you to take a moment and complete the evaluation that will appear momentarily on your screen. Your comments and suggestions are always important as it helps us provide you with future quality programming. Today's program is copyrighted in 2015 by the Cooperative American Physicians Incorporated, all rights reserved.
The information in this program should not be considered legal advice, applicable to a specific situation. Legal guidance for individual matters should be obtained from a retained attorney.